I know Snyderverse has its good moments here and there, and I don't want to be the kind of person to yuck other people's yum and just leave it as is, but the attitudes that I'm seeing from some of y'all, especially leading up to and even after the release of the new Superman movie, are really testing me, and well, now I gotta vent. If there's one thing that I think was mishandled the most in Snyderverse, it is definitely the death and return of Superman. Changes in adaptation are inevitable when you go from comics to live action movies, especially when the former medium can get pretty wacky sometimes. And I'm usually willing to give grace if the adaptation is not one to one. However, when adapting a major crossover event into a medium that has a lower suspension of disbelief and way stricter time limits, you run the risk of minimizing the impact that the original story had. I have the same issue with how MCU adapted Civil War because the Superhuman Registration Act was such a massively divisive issue. But we don't see anywhere near the same scale of that schism because, let's be honest, the Avengers at that point don't really like each other. Everyone's fighting for completely different reasons. The audience is too focused on the bromance triangle between Steve, Tony, and Bucky. And above all else, the Sokovia Accords don't really matter in the grand scheme of things aside from two people going under house arrest and one other person going on the run. And then they're basically forgotten by the time Infinity War rolls around, and then they're repealed a couple years after the blip, so it's like, what's the point? Now to circle back to Snyderverse, not only were they running the risk of reducing the scale and impact of the death and return of Superman, they decided to introduce the storyline in the second movie ever of this universe. That is not enough time to get emotionally attached to a character to care whether they live or die, let alone establish Superman's reputation as a hero. Especially when it feels like most everyone doesn't like or trust him, and unfortunately from their perspective, for very good reason. Henry Cavill is pretty to look at, but aura framing is not a substitute for developing character or emotional stakes. Compared to how comic readers were reacting when these stories originally dropped, this adaptation didn't even feel like a drop in the bucket of the cultural zeitgeist, and when I finally watched this movie, I felt nothing. It certainly doesn't help that they explicitly hint that, of course, he's eventually going to come back in the Justice League marketing just outright spoils for you that he comes back. I know death isn't permanent in comics unless you're Uncle Ben or the original Captain Marvel, but at least give me some proper tension and the gravity of this character's passing. If a film's production doesn't care about setting up emotional stakes, why should I care to get invested? And that's a huge reason why, aside from a few select movies, I just can't get into Snyderverse. They played their cards way too early for the sake of hype instead of establishing character and story like you're supposed to do first.